I want us to look back a bit to when we were children in school. All of us in the course of that schooling, of course, were required to read certain books as part of our learning in literature. And I imagine for most of us, most of these books we've never revisited. We may be thankful that we can claim to have read them, but they weren't necessarily something that we enjoyed. We did not necessarily find them interesting or entertaining, and instead they simply remain a quaint relic of our past. But there are also exceptions. Books that we were forced to read in school, and yet we discovered that we liked them. For me, a good example of one of those exceptions would be Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And despite the fact that it was forced upon me, I discovered I quite enjoyed it. And I have read it a couple of times since, on my own accord. It's a great story. It's the story of a young orphan boy named Pip who makes good. It's the story of him growing up and how he changes and develops and grows into the man he becomes. And the reason why it's titled the way it is because of the mindset behind Pip as he grows up. You see, he has this secret benefactor who is helping him to develop into a gentleman, a member of high society. Now he's an orphan, he grows up in a rural village. He's basically a nobody until his benefactor comes along. Now he doesn't know who the benefactor is, but he assumes that it is the crazy old rich lady in his village whose adopted daughter Estella that Pip has fallen in love with. And his assumption is that all this training and preparation is to make him into a worthy prospect to be her husband. And as the story goes on and the story goes through his successes and his failures, he eventually learns who his benefactor really is. And it's not who he thought. His benefactor is a criminal that he once helped as a child. And he was never meant to be with Estella. And at the end of the book, when he's reached middle age, he finds himself alone, wiser, discovering that while things didn't quite play out the way his great expectations told him they would, he finds himself a good man nonetheless. Now, interestingly enough, in 1860 whenever Dickens published this work, the audiences that read it hated that ending. And so in order to fulfill their expectations, he rewrote the ending so that Pip gets the girl after all. Expectations of the audience had their impact on the story as well. Palm Sunday is a day about expectations. And that's why I've decided to look back at that old book as an illustration to put us in that mindset of what was going on that road into Jerusalem. Like Pip and the audiences that were reading about him 150 years ago, things don't quite play out the way they expected. Jesus comes into Jerusalem with all the fanfare of royalty. He's riding upon a donkey and a colt in prediction, in fulfillment of ancient prophecies and ancient predictions. And he's lauded as the son of David, heir to the long vacant throne of old Israel. And the crowd is waving palm branches and tossing their cloaks into the street, and all this fanfare and hullabaloo going on and singing praises to this man. What do you suppose they were thinking? I mean, outside of the obvious, what's really behind all of the fanfare on Palm Sunday? What were their great expectations? What did they think was going to happen? What do they suppose Jesus was going to do? The story provides us some clues as to what might have been in their mindset. History certainly provides some. Let's talk a bit about David, the man Jesus is heralded as the heir of. Most of us remember the stories of David from our Sunday school. Most famously, his battle with the giant Goliath, of how he became king. But for the people of Jesus' day, those stories carried more than just an air of nostalgia. David was a part of Israel's golden age and in many ways had come to symbolize those good times. Times of beauty and freedom and prosperity that the people had not seen for centuries. It had been lost to a series of conquering empires that had fought and bled over that strip of land for over 500 years. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and now Rome. That, of course, leads us into the next clue. Having been under the thumb of the Roman Empire for some 75 years now, and the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great and his descendants before that, the people of Jerusalem had long been exposed to the traditions and the cultures of those peoples. It is not coincidental that scholars of the church have referred to Jesus' journey into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday as his triumphal entry. Because that's what it echoes. Triumph. Those of us who have studied Roman history, studied perhaps the Latin language, we know that triumph is a public event. It conjures images of the Caesars marching their armies through the streets of Rome, flushed with victory over their enemies. It was a celebration of military victory. This was not an alien idea to the people of Jerusalem. They had heard of such events throughout the empire. Perhaps some had even seen one. And now they see Jesus marching into the city surrounded by adoring masses. And it probably looked really familiar. Our third clue is a subtle one. It's geography. The events of Palm Sunday, as they are recorded in the Gospels, have an amazing amount of geographic detail. Matthew, Mark, Luke, all of them are very precise about talking about where Jesus comes from as he enters the city, what road he takes, what gate he uses to enter. This is intentional. We are meant to recognize from these clues that the road that Jesus takes is also the one that would take him the closest to a very important landmark in the city of Jerusalem, the Roman garrison at Antonia Fortress. We should be able to put the pieces together at this point and get a sense of what those great expectations were on that day, what the people wanted, what they were expecting was a king like of old, like David. One who would liberate them from their enemies. One who would destroy the hated Romans and bring them back to that time of peace and prosperity that they remembered under David. They expected Jesus to march on that fortress, rally the people in revolt, and then use his miraculous powers to strike down all who opposed them, or at least something like that. But that's not what happened. Jesus didn't do any of that. In fact, as he enters the city and he comes to the front gate of the fortress, he rides past on to the other major landmark that can be found along that road, which is the great temple. And when he enters, he becomes infuriated at the sight that he sees, the money changers and the merchants making vulgar prophets off of the temple rituals, ripping people off so that they may conduct their prayers and their spiritual services. So Jesus loses his temper, and he drives out the money changers. Another famous story from the Bible. And the crowd that followed him into the city gets to see this. They were expecting him to attack the Romans 2 blocks back. Instead, he attacks his own people. Not what they were expecting. Not even remotely. And the excitement and the hosannas and the praises turn to disappointment. And that disappointment turns to anger. And you hear that anger on Friday. Crucify him. Crucify him. It's just a few days later. How quickly the mood turns. But the truth is, Jesus didn't come to fulfill the crowd's expectations of him. He came to fulfill God's expectations. And God's plan would never be something so short-sighted as the reestablishment of some long-dead kingdom. No, God is thinking more grandly than that. He's thinking back to that old covenant that he made with the ancestors of that crowd. One where he told Abraham that from him would come a blessing that would be for all the nations of the world. He would hardly serve to fulfill that covenant by destroying one nation and raising up another. That's not what God has in mind. He's thinking much more broadly. He knows that the people of Israel are hardly the first or the only people to suffer as they have. He knows that all people and all peoples experience misery in their lives in some form because they all share a common enemy. Not a nation or a tyrant or anything quite so mundane. Something far more scary, far more powerful. The power of sin and death. That is the foe that needs to be vanquished. And that is the foe that Jesus has come to defeat. But he's going to do it God's way, not ours. Not by killing. No, he will defeat this enemy by dying and rising again. You see, Palm Sunday really is Jesus' triumphal entry. But it's a triumph not against the enemy that everyone expected. It's a triumph against the enemy that everyone needs to see defeated. Jesus came to save them, but not just the crowd of Jews that herald his coming with palm branches and praises, but also those Romans standing upon the walls looking at the crowd nervously. And also the money changers in the temple whose practices upset Jesus so much. And also the Pharisees and the scribes in their lavish homes. And also for you and for me, generations removed from these events through the span of time. Jesus came to save them all. In order to do that, he couldn't march on Antonia Fortress. What good would that do? The Romans were such a small enemy in the grand scheme of things. No, he had a definite destination in mind that he was marching on that day. It's on the other side of the city. It's the hill of Golgotha, where the cross awaits him. And it is on that hill that Jesus will do battle. It's on that hill that he will claim his victory. And through that victory, we will all triumph. Amen.